So, you want to be a reseller? What should you sell? When you're wanting to get into resale, doesn't matter what platform it's on, there are 3 questions that you need to ask yourself. What are you interested in? What do you already know about? And what sourcing options do you have? The reason why you need to ask yourself these very specific questions is the very first one: what are you interested in? Because I can promise you, if you do not source things or do not sell things that interest you even the littlest tiny bit, you're gonna get bored, you're not gonna be motivated, because you're not gonna wanna do it. Number 2, what do you already know about? The reason why you need to ask yourself this question is because reselling takes a lot of research. And if you have to start researching things from scratch, it's gonna take you that much longer to get into the whole reselling game. If you start to focus on things that you might already have some knowledge about, that can save you time, and you can spend your precious time researching things that you don't already know about. When you ask yourself that question, what do you already know about, you can consider lots of different factors in that category. You could think, what merchandise do you already know some things about? What kind of item do you already know some things about? Don't just think about what items you do or don't know about. Think about what platforms you already know about. Do you already shop on Amazon frequently? Do you already shop on eBay all the time? Have you sold on eBay before and think you know a little bit about how the selling platform could work? You can use your knowledge to your advantage that way too when you're trying to figure out where to start selling. So just think about what you already know a little bit about. You know, if you have never even bought something on eBay before, starting off selling on eBay might not be the best route unless you're willing to invest a lot of time into research. And then again, let's talk about what sourcing options you have. Do you have a whole bunch of thrift stores where you live? Are thrift stores just in abundance? Secondhand stores? Is there community garage sales everywhere you turn? What kind of sourcing options do you have for finding merchandise? The kind of merchandise you're able to find is going to depend greatly on whether or not you can sustain a business on particular items. You guys have heard me say a lot that I do not have a whole lot of sourcing options. That's kind of why I had to tailor my eBay store to what I did have access to. I only have 1 Goodwill and 1 thrift shop that are near me. That is it. Anything beyond that, I have got to drive at least a half an hour. And even then, driving a half an hour doesn't get me much better. I have to go more like an hour to get any sort of other sourcing options. So I had to take what sourcing options I had locally to me, and I had to figure out, okay, what kind of items can I sell based on my sourcing options? And that's how I came up with selling jeans, because that was the one constant in both of my thrifting locations that I was able to find by trial and error. No matter what time of year, what time of day, what day of week I went, there was always jeans, and jeans were a really good price. So I went ahead and I started selling more jeans and more jeans and more jeans. And then I ended up with like 1,000 pairs just from sourcing locally. So if you have some sourcing options that are near you, and maybe these thrift stores that you have a lot of antiquities, then maybe you should get into antiques. Or if you have a ton of secondhand or consignment clothing stores, maybe you should look at selling clothing. If you don't have either one and you have to rely strictly on retail, then maybe you should focus on walking the clearance aisles and reselling retail arbitrage. You have to find out what you have access to before you can decide everything you're going to be selling. As with everything in life, there's ups and downs. So there's upsides and downsides to selling things. First, I want to talk about the most obvious one. The most obvious thing to resell, the most popular thing to resell, Clothing items. Everybody's selling clothing items. If you look on YouTube, if you look in Facebook groups, everybody is talking about thrifting clothes. They're talking about brands, they're talking about sizes, they're talking about styles, they're talking about garments in particular. They're talking about what they thrifted. It is without a doubt the most popular item for sale. But you need to ask yourself, is selling clothes for you? You have to be at least a little bit interested in clothing to sell clothes, because there is a lot to learn. When you're selling clothing, there is so much to learn. You have to be able to follow it. You have to have some interest in it, because there's so much to know about. If you are bored with it, you're probably not going to retain the information. You're just going to flush it. Something else to consider about clothing is that it is very oversaturated. It does not take a genius to look at eBay and see how oversaturated clothing is. If you search a certain word or a certain size, you will see hundreds of thousands, if not millions of listings. If you do a basic search for women's top size large, you're probably gonna get a couple of million different listings pop up. It is way oversaturated. And a lot of brands are oversaturated because there's so many in circulation. Also, a lot of people are starting to resell. And when people get started on reselling, clothing is one of the very first things, if not the first thing that they hop on the train for, because usually it's a little bit of money invested. It doesn't take up a lot of space. And for a lot of people, clothing is easy. It's easy because people already have knowledge about it. And it's easy because everybody buys clothes, especially on a platform like eBay. eBay is very well known for selling a lot of clothing items, because a lot of people know that they can get a much better deal on eBay than just going to the store and buying it. So when someone starts to look at reselling on a platform like eBay, clothing is the first thing that pops into their mind. And because of that, it is way oversaturated. So what does being oversaturated mean exactly? It means there's a lot. There's a lot of stuff on eBay in the clothing categories. So that can mean a couple of different things. One, it could mean you're not gonna sell it for a lot of money. Two, you might not sell it at all. Or three, it's gonna take a long time to sell things because there's so many similar items out there. So for that reason alone, starting with clothing might not be a good idea, especially if you get discouraged easily. Because if you start selling on eBay and you're not really selling and you're only selling clothing, you might not be selling the items, not because they're not worth it, but because there's so many items out there that are similar to it already. Getting started with clothing is tough, and it's really easy to become discouraged. On the flip side to that, if you have access to clothing that's really super cheap and it's high quality, and you know that you're going to be able to sell it for a really good price to somebody and make a huge profit, clothing might be good for you. Me personally, I have to be really careful. I live in rural southern, Me personally, I have to be really careful. I live in, oh my God, I can't speak. I live in rural central Kansas, and I do not have a lot of high quality brands where I live. All of the items that I can find are super common, so I have to be prepared to sell them for a really cheap price if I'm going to flip it. But if you live in an area where there's a lot of high quality fashion and you're able to get it at a really good price, you might do a lot better selling clothing than someone like me. Something else that I really like to sell a lot of is consumables. And the reason why I got into selling consumables is not only because of my lack of thrift stores, but because consumables is one of those things that people come back for again and again and again, because the key word there is consume. It means that people consume the item and they go shop for more. So consumables might be a food item, it might be a household good product, it could be a beauty product, it could be a personal care item, anything that you use, it's gone and you need to buy more. that's a consumable. You can sell all kinds of consumables on eBay. You just have to make sure that you can find them for the right price. And then when you sell them, you have to make sure that you can make a profit that makes it worth it. Sticking on that same theme would be retail arbitrage items. And when we say retail arbitrage, we basically mean going to Walmart, going to other retail stores, and going up and down the clearance aisles, buying them cheap and flipping them for more money on either Amazon, eBay, some other selling platform. Retail arbitrage is basically where you go to a retail store, you buy retail, and you resell the retail. That's retail arbitrage. If you don't have a lot of thrift stores near you where you could buy secondhand or antiquities or unique one-of-a-kind items, then retail might be for you. Maybe you have an abundance of grocery stores, retail outlets. Maybe you have a lot of places like Big Lots where they sell closeout items. Retail arbitrage might be for you if you have that kind of situation. Maybe there's a special niche that you're passionate about. I remember when I was growing up, my dad would sell vintage and retro toys. That was his big thing. Now he does a little bit of it, but when I was a kid growing up watching my dad sell on eBay, that was his thing. He sold vintage toys. And I remember in the basement, there were just shelves upon shelves of toys from like the 60s, 70s, 50s, and earlier. And if it was before the, well, let's see, at the time, I think it was before the 80s, but of course, as time goes on, you know, more decades get added into the whole vintage thing. At the time, it was, if anything below like 1985, he didn't care about. If it was, you know, if it was circa 1985, he bought it and he resold it on eBay because that's what he was passionate about. And that's what he liked the hunt for. He liked going to thrift stores and looking for those kind of things. He liked going to garage sales and looking for those kind of things. He had a passion for it, so he enjoyed it. So that's what he sold. Going along with the same theme for retail arbitrage, you might look in the clearance aisles for toy items. A lot of people make really good money selling retail arbitrage toys on platforms like Amazon, especially with Q4 coming up. Christmas! Bottom line is find something that you have access to, something that you can build a business around, and get going on it. And then if you want to add a little bit more niches that maybe you're a little less familiar with, then you can. But start by focusing on those items that you already know a little bit about or that you're already passionate about. 3 things that you should always consider when you're trying to decide what to buy and resell. The first thing that I always think about is, how am I going to ship this? If you're selling on an e-commerce platform, chances are you are going to be shipping that item. And if you have something that is bulky or something that is awkward or something that is breakable or something that is unique or weirdly shaped, you need to be thinking about how you're going to ship that item. And not just how you're going to ship it, but what the shipping could be. You know, like how much the shipping will cost. Because if the shipping cost is going to be outrageous and it outweighs the value of the item, it might not be worth selling. If you have an item that's only worth $20, but it's gonna cost $40 to ship it, you need to think to yourself, as a buyer, would $40 for shipping be worth this $20 item? Things to consider. The second thing you should always consider is storage space. Do you have a place to store the item that you want to sell? You know, there are items that I could want to sell all day long, but when it comes down to it, I don't have room for pallets of items. You have to consider the size of the items. If you have limited storage space and items that are this big, how many of this big item can you store in the space that you have available? If you have precious amounts of storage space, you might want to reconsider smaller items that are compact and you can store nicely and neatly and not have it spill out everywhere and just be awkward. And the third thing that you should consider is the money invested. You don't want to spend a whole lot of money invested in one item if you don't have that money to invest in one item, especially if it could take a long time for that one thing to sell. If you have all of your money tied up in one or two items, you're stuck until those one or two items sell, and then you can get your initial investment back. You also want to consider your time and energy in listing the item. If the item is dirty and old and broke down and you have to spend a whole lot of time cleaning the item, repairing the item, if it's going to take forever to photograph, if there's a ton of measurements you have to do, if it would take an eternity to package it to ship it safely, maybe the money isn't worth it. You know what I'm saying? But only you can evaluate if it'd be worth your time or not. Think about that. Think about how much time it would take to clean something up, how much time it would take to repair, or how much time it would take to package and ship it, how much time it would take you to list it. Is it going to be worth the money? Always consider that. Also, make sure you know significant price points right off the top of your head. That is something that you should definitely consider when you are trying to decide what to sell. Me personally, I know that with clothing items, I'm just going to give this as a for instance. With clothing items, I know that I can make more profits selling jeans than I can selling shirts. That just has to do with the kind of brands I have access to and the cost per item. So I tend to not waste my time with shirts when I know I can make more money with pants. And I just know that off the top of my head. And it's important. It's important to know your price points. It's important to know what kind of profit margins you're working with on certain items. Right, you guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and let me know. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed to me yet, I hope you will. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you with my next video. Bye.